Hello, this is Denise Olson, and this is my developmental autobiography. I'm going to go ahead and start with the first phase. It's called the early childhood, 0 to 5 years. I have a lot to cover. Bronfenbrenner's bioecological theory is a comprehensive developmental model proposed by Bronfenbrenner that takes into account the many levels of influence the environment can have on an individual. The interacting systems in this model are the microsystem, the mesosystem, the exosystem, and the macrosystem. So I'll first start with the very first part, the individual, who is me, the child, Denise Valentina Colon. I was born female and I identify as such, born healthy in Huntington Beach. The microsystem is the immediate environment where proximal processes are played out. So the immediate things that influenced me as a child, which were family, school, peers, health. So I live with my mother, father, abuela, uncle, and my sister. I was born in Huntington Beach but moved to Puerto Rico. Parents separated at age 2 years old, and my first language is Spanish. My father leaves the home to find work, and economically, we were challenged in Puerto Rico. We did struggle quite a bit financially, and we attended school at a Catholic school, and our culture was rich with religious traditions. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about just the fact that as a child, I did have to move. Um, the separation was not it was volatile a bit. My dad actually took us away from my mom to Puerto Rico and without her permission, and um, my father did have to find work and left the home uh, to live in Florida for a little while just to find stability with um, work. And so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next stages because I have a lot to answer here with questions regarding these systems. Bronfenbrenner's bioecological theory includes the mesosystem, exosystem, and macrosystem, where the mesosystem, school and family, there was rules set about safety between school and family. So that's how that affected us, neighbors and families and siblings. Um, there was neighbors that helped us out when my grandmother was unavailable, and we had church and traditions in our home, like prayer. We had a saints display with candles on it. The holidays played a major role. Even some Taino Native American culture was tied into the saints display with the candles. I have distinct memories of church and traditions in our home, that were tied into how it influenced us in our lives. The exosystem, the level of the environment that children may not directly interact with, but influence us. There's the dynamics of my mom not being there anymore, and even though she wasn't an influence, I know that there was some effects there, with the relationship I had with my abuela, and the father's work and our school. He wasn't able to come to our school. He was busy and away, and so he wasn't really involved in our life like that. So his work affected our lives with the connection that we had with our teachers and things like that. Our influence of media, this was interesting to think about. Sesame Street had influenced me quite a bit, taught me a lot of values, in Spanish and later on in English when I went back to California. And so I remember learning a ton of stuff on Sesame Street and how it had influenced me. The macro system, the customs and character of the larger culture, definitely Puerto Rican culture. There is a thing with the way that United States has jurisdiction and sovereignty over us, and so if you're Puerto Rican, you are proud. You pretty much like display the flag. I remember pledging allegiance to not just our flag, Puerto Rican flag, but also to the United States flag. And but Puerto Ricans are super proud, and there is a little bitterness and resentment for U.S. has a lot of control over some of those things in the island, and so I do remember that. Agriculture to manufacture, there's not a lot of opportunity there, and you could feel that on the island. It's a very small island and it's depressed. And then there's a lot of rich Puerto Rican culture, dance, music, food. It's just fun and lively, and I feel like the music and the dancing and the culture there really influenced me as a little girl. And you'll see that later on as I share more. So, early childhood, 0 to 5 years old, the questions that I posted were: what were the most salient events, people, or influences in the phase? And there is my mom, at least up to 2 years old, my father for a few years as well, my abuela, uncle, and sister, who my sister and I were very close, so we're only a year apart. The influences in this phase as well, like I said, mentioned church, school, um, neighbors who were really involved. I had a neighbor who actually helped one of my cats who got hurt. I just have a lot of memories surrounded with like the culture and the traditions of the holidays. So yeah, there is a lot of influence here with these certain events and people that I've already mentioned. In this phase, what evidence shows that you were moving forward, on hold, or stuck in regard to developmental tasks? I have memories from this stage, lots of them, obviously. Development must have been normal. Language is attached to my memory, and I can remember as far back as potty training stages. So, my mother has shared that I was an easy baby. I was easy to soothe and loved to help her around the house as well as helping with my little sister. I remember riding my big wheel when I was small. I loved that. That bike. And I also remember learning how to ride a bike with training wheels. And I remember favorite dresses. My vocabulary is still intact with Spanish, like colors, numbers, objects, body parts. So, plants. I remember that. I don't speak fluent Spanish right now, but I have a huge vocabulary. I remember my garden, my animals, the activities. And so I would say that this phase, I even though there was a lot of stuff going on, I, I even had to endure some abuse from my uncle, unfortunately, but I was able to self regulate my emotions and I tended to be helpful with family. So, and I have a lot of healthy memories from that time. So, all right, I will go ahead and move on to middle childhood, 6 to 11 years old. I decided to use Erik Erikson's stage of psychosocial development theory. Erik Erikson studied psychoanalytical theories with Anna Freud and later developed his own theory of personality development. His theories focus on explaining the psychosocial aspects of behavior, attitudes, and feelings towards the self and towards others. And so he has 8 psychosocial stages, which I have listed here in the picture. The main ones that we are going to be focusing on is the 5 to 13 years industry versus inferiority. I noticed in the textbook it was a little different. Approximate age, I believe in the textbook it was 6 to 12 years. So the approximate age here, it varies a little bit depending on where you find your resources. But we're going to be focusing on industry versus inferiority, and the next stage will be working on identity versus role confusion. So, middle childhood, 6 to 11 years old, industry versus inferiority. inferiority. Child needs to learn important academic skills and compared favorably with peers in school. I struggled with this, being that I spoke Spanish and came back to California. That was not easy either. My mom ended up taking us away from my dad, and I was unable to see him again. So they had a very volatile relationship, and oftentimes they obviously use the children to hurt each other, but it's also hurt us um, very much in our academic skills, in our development of understanding who we were. In most industrial societies today, children's work begins in school, where they are expected to achieve competence in basic skills such as reading, arithmetic, and that will serve them in nearly any adult work that they might take on. Erickson argued that these early work experiences can provide a child with a feeling of industry, which is both a belief in his ability to master the skills and tools needed to be productive, and a sense of the pleasure of work completion. So basically, here, positive outcomes or virtue developed in this stage would be competence. And I have to say that this probably was the harder time out of all my phases in life, because I did not feel competent at all. And I had no idea why it was I didn't feel competent. I just thought I was stupid. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. On the other hand, it says here negative outcomes can also occur when the child is feeling inadequate and inferior. If they cannot seem to master the skills that are required of them, and begins to be discouraged about how effective they can be in contributing in this world, basically. So the people in my life were my mother, well, my father for a while, my mother, my grandmother, my uncle. But like I said, there was another transition here where I came back to California. I had a stepfather from the Middle East. He was pretty hot-tempered. And so this was a phase where, like, developmentally at this stage, I feel I got a bit behind, having to come from Puerto Rico back to California and not have any help with English learning at all. My mom did not speak any Spanish at all. She carried a little book around and tried to translate what we said, and it was huge for me to learn how to speak English right away. She didn't want us to speak Spanish once we learned English. So there was a lot of different things going on developmentally at this stage. I was unable to connect with the things at school and learn because I could not understand what they were saying. And I was made fun of by peers, bullied quite often, and because I looked different. So I wanted to share my experience with social awareness at this age. I was marginalized and discriminated against, and the resistance and immersion issues that held me back developmentally, and especially at school, is why I felt like I was unable to see myself as someone who could be competent, according to Erickson's theory. Resistance and immersion were buffered by a strong racial ethnic identity. So the peers that I had, we moved so much. Every year, I think we were moving to a different school. I think it was a way for my mom to stay away from my dad and not find us. But that affected the connection we had with our teachers. I basically moved from, Whittier, California, to La Habra, to Huntington, to Laguna Beach, and we moved to Roseville, and then to Folsom, California. And that was all between this time frame of 6 to 11 years old. So it was difficult to have steady peers. It was hard to have steady teachers who could help us. So And on top of it, the peers just did not socially accept us. We were Spanish speaking. I dressed funny. My mom dressed me in older clothes. I mean, I came from a culture of rich Hispanic background, to all of a sudden, and I'm wearing like, in the 80s, I was wearing like bell bottoms, which were outdated. So I was made fun of for my clothes, and I couldn't understand why. Um, so I was bullied quite a bit. I remember kids chasing my sister and I back to the house and throwing things at the car. Um, so it wasn't an easy time of our lives. This phase definitely made me feel stuck. I couldn't read until I was in sixth grade. That's a long time. That's 11 to 12 years old. So I felt stupid and I was unaware that as a child, I just didn't have the proper role models or the proper support. And I think if I would have had the proper support, I know I would have been able to move forward. But I also had a mom who had a mental illness. She's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and um, she was hospitalized before I was born, but she did struggle with things, and I remember seeing that struggle growing up. So it's like you just are given what you've got and you just do the best that you can. And that unfortunately was my life for a big period of time in this phase where I just felt like um, I didn't belong and I didn't know the people around me very well. And they definitely reacted in a very different way in my environment, socially. So um, it was a very tumultuous period of time. And there was no way I could develop a sense of industry. I was unable to develop steady friendships. It was a very painful time. So, this, I would say, is the most difficult phase of my life. So, I hope that answers those questions. All right. Then we move on to the adolescence, 12 to 17 years old. Erickson's stage of psychosocial crisis, identity versus role confusion. In the adolescence, teens work on fashioning an adult identity, which includes developing a sense of direction for the vocational lives. This process continues, as we have seen, and well into young adulthood. Identity involves the experiences, relationships, beliefs, values, memories that make up a person's subject sense of self. And kids who are not allowed to explore and test our different identities might be left with what Erickson referred to as role confusion, which can result in the following: being unsure of who you are and where you fit in, drifting from one job or relationship to another, and feeling disappointed and confused about your place in life. And so this was a very important stage of my life, adolescence. I learned a lot about discovering who I was. The most salient people in my life were my parents, siblings, friends, and music teacher. And you'll see that I'm playing the violin and the guitar here, but I believe that this outlet was really quite a lifesaver in my life, including the music teacher who was involved in my life at that time. Um, the How does your developmental history explain who you are today? So, Erickson's theory of identity involves experiences, relationships, beliefs, values, and memories that make up a person's subjective sense of self. As I left junior high and entered into high school, a music teacher made sure I continued to learn music. I felt important, and my music teachers helped me to see myself differently. So, this was the very first time I was able to see that I could achieve something. And I had been reading, writing, and trying to catch up with my academics during this time. As so, I felt like music was very connected to my learning capability. I was able to stay in the high school that I went to for 2 years, where I met my first best friend. And it was funny because someone was bullying her, and I stepped in to help her. And I also walked another kid to school each day, making sure that she would not get hurt. She was bullied often. And so um, I had many friends of different backgrounds, but I do remember and recognize the need to be protective, serve, and help others, which follows me into adulthood. I am very altruistic in nature, and I believe that this was that way for me when I was little. So I helped an elderly man with cleaning his home, and I would play board games with him. And no one encouraged me to do that. I would just do these things. Um, and so I my academics were average, and I was able to blend in with my peers and not stand out so much. At this time, that was my goal, is just to like come across as I'm smart and I got this, and life is okay. And so I was in a survival mode, and music really helped me to feel like I could um, uh, understand people, things, work with people in a different way than I never had before. So, how does your developmental history explain who you are today? Um, I would say that you just heard a little bit of how like music affected me and teachers and the support I had. Um, on question number 3, where was I developmentally in the stage? I would say that there was role confusion issues, lack of confidence, and a lack of self identity can make it difficult for people to have confidence in themselves and their abilities. Difficulties with commitment. I definitely had that. A stable personal identity allows individuals to have better relationship with others. My mother being schizophrenic and stepfather who would lose his temper on my sister and I made it really hard for us to trust people. And often I would feel alone and abandoned. I do remember running away a lot, and then coming back to a home where nobody cared if I had been there or not. And that was a lonely feeling. But I was um, learning to strengthen my identity. And the way that I did that was I thought a lot about my core values that were important to me. I didn't want to follow the same patterns that my family had demonstrated. So I was very deliberate about choices in my life, very stubborn, and argued a lot with my mom in maintaining those values and identity. I actually argued with my mom about reading scriptures. She got mad at me for that. I didn't do drugs. I did not touch them. I did not drink alcohol. I knew that those were avenues that would not do me or serve me well. So I stayed away from that in that crowd. So music helped me to see myself in a different light. I became skilled at things that I enjoyed. I took time to teach myself because we didn't have money for private lessons. So I taught myself how to read music, and worked with peers in learning how to read music as well. So I would definitely work with my teachers and peers at the public schools. Um, I took time to find time to practice the violin and guitar, which helped me to get acquainted with myself. And then for the first time, I saw talent, resilience, and hope of learning through music. So I identified a lot differently with with that talent. I think it helped me self-regulate as well my emotions. I would find myself playing the music in my room, and it would actually calm the whole household down, because it was classical music on the violin. So um, yeah, this was interesting to put Erickson's theories into um, my development, the confusion issues and lack of confidence. But there was a lot of resilience and a lot of identity building that helped me later on in life. All right. So early adulthood. We're going to go back to Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory. And I'm going to start with my identity, which I was married at age 19. My husband was 18, very young. My name's Denise Valentina Olson. I still identify as a female, and I'm healthy and very active. My microsystem, my immediate environment, was I live with my husband and 3 children. Lived in Orangeville, and then I moved to Crescent City, California. So supportive extended family, husband's mom and his grandmother. There was support there for the first time. I went to college, the Redwoods, for junior college, and then I went to Chico State. I had church family for the first time, a steady church family. And so I became a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And husband has great job, and we had a wonderful health care. We were not economically challenged. We own 2 homes, and so we've been blessed in the financial area. I maintain a job and work full time as a director, a music director, and an academic advisor. And I have friends who help me raise my children. I call them chosen family. And I have a rich culture and religious traditions. So this is way different steadiness in my immediate environment and influence. The mesosystem, the network of microsystems that relate with and modify one another, school and family, right? Children's school teachers, relationships that I had with them. I went back to school myself, and I had relationships with peers and how that played into my family life. It was just, I was very involved in the community. This is my life. Church and traditions in our home, callings in the church, family prayers, temples, and holiday traditions play heavily in my home. Like my home has very huge connections with education, being involved with my kids' education, their teachers. You would find me in their classrooms helping and grading paperwork. That's what led me back to school, to college, because I wanted to continue my own education. And the peers that I have that are still part of my home life, the church and traditions in our home, like every day we have these. I still, even though I'm away from home, we still pray together on the phone. So these things and traditions are very connected to my personal life. Exosystem, the level of the environment. I'm not going to read that. I'm just going to talk about the dynamics regarding relationship with my husband's job. He was unavailable, and he had a job change where he was on the road, traveling away from home for long periods of time, and I had to handle a lot of the raising of the kids. So that affected my that was my exosystem example of how it affected my individual life. Influence of social media trends and keeping up with the Joneses. I say that because that's what media seems to be these days. What are you doing? How do you portray yourself as being a positive, happy person on media, and how that plays into your mental health? Sometimes it could be positive, sometimes it's negative. So, and then there's the neighborhood, and we have one crazy neighbor. I don't know who doesn't have one, but there are rules that my children had to grow up like being cautious about certain things and what they're allowed to do. So the macro system, the American government policy and how it affects my family, public school funding. We don't have certain music programs, which I'm huge on. That's how I became a music director in our community. They don't have string programs. We have property taxes, federal taxes, taxes in general that just kill us. I'm just saying that this has a huge, it plays a big role in our families' resources. And in small town politics, of course, we have a huge, predominantly white community. When BLM, and it's still an issue, we had, unfortunately, a shooting, and black man was shot and killed by our law enforcement, and it was a huge issue in our town. We also live on Native American lands, and they lack a lot of resources and help. And so these things play a huge role in our small town politics. Our law enforcement just made the state capitol paper about how we are a lawless land in Del Norte County. So the Sacramento Bee has a whole article about how law enforcement has some huge issues in Del Norte County. So as I'm closing this up, early adulthood. What were the most salient events and people? Obviously, my family, my husband, and my 3 children. are the most salient people in my family. I mean, the most influential. Um, I learned a whole lot from raising my children. I feel like they taught me how, I think they helped heal a lot of parts of my life, my personal life, my family structure. And I feel they have no idea, my children don't have an idea how much they have impacted me in my own personal life, um, and how my self-worth had been reflected upon how I was as a mother to them and how I took care of my family. So, how does your developmental history explain who you are today? Um, the support system later in life helped me flourish. Just one individual changed my world, and that was my husband. My husband and I both came from low income families, but my husband had a wonderful mom and grandmother who was very involved in his life. And just having a couple of strong family members support us and help us grow made a world of difference. I began to develop a better trust for people, and I struggled with that for many years. Still do occasionally, being um, from a family of having a mother with mental illness was hard, but I love that I am like connected with my children in a different way, and that I could see healing in my life. They are all so different, my kids, and they've just been a huge blessing in my life as well, in my development as a human being. Uh, how do your own developmental challenges influence how you will perceive and conceptualize your clients' developmental challenges? I clearly can identify the connections between relationships, economic resources, community, education, physical activities that help people self regulate, and so many other factors that have helped me survive and become a more healed young adult. And I say healed because definitely including these things, right? These resources, the community, my education, my physical activities, all of this has helped me to become a strong, resilient human being. And so I clearly identify those connections. And um, so it is a process, and I still am working on it. And I believe my experience helps me to see my clients as individuals who need a person on their side, a person who will listen, support, and provide insight to healthy patterns in life. And those tools help a person become stronger and more resilient. And yes, I do understand that not everyone will progress, but the point is that I will be there to support others and help them deal with their developmental challenges. And I can see how these things affect a human being and how they affected me as an adult. You can see the connection between the healthy healing from music and how I take that and teach others now, in my community who don't have those resources. I teach them how to play those instruments, and it's a healthy avenue. So I just, it's interesting how your development and your challenges affect you as an adult, and I can see those patterns. Lastly, how do these personal self reflections and your evolving self awareness affect your conception of yourself as a counselor in training? First of all, I can't wait to be a counselor. I feel this is a calling for me in my life. And when I was small, I loved to help people. I was altruistic in nature. And I know that my experiences will help bring compassion to a lot of different people and backgrounds. Um, I know it will be hard for me to work with people who have been abused, who have been abusive to others mainly, but I also understand their challenges in development. Not everyone had an outlet like I did. Not everyone can avoid the pitfalls that life introduces for coping mechanisms. This life is not easy, and it can be very painful, and I know this. I have lived it. I believe that experience will help me to be compassionate, and I love learning about all these theories and helping tools. I want to bring more light to this world. I want to be able to help people. And I just can see all sorts of challenges, but I also am very aware of like how those challenges actually will help me I think it'll help me be a good counselor, but we shall see. These are my reference pages, just the reference from my textbook, and I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity that I had to do this video. Thank you.